I'm going to be talking about the ancient secular mythology about what is known by the ancients as the winged disc, and how it relates to Leviathan, or Planet X, also known by some as Nibiru. First, however, I will start with the ancient Hebrew tradition. Moses was from the tribe of Levi, and in the desert God told him to go to Egypt to rescue his people, and gave him power to cast his rod into a serpent, which in Hebrew the word is Nakash, in Exodus 4:3. When he threw it down in front of Pharaoh in Egypt, however, the word is not Nakash, but Tanin, instead, which means dragon or sea monster. When you put Levi in front of Tanin, you get Levi Tanin. But when combined as one word, some letters get dropped to become Levi Tin, which is Leviathan, the serpent of Moses. Moses kept his Egyptian name Moses rather than his Hebrew given name, which means to draw out of the water, which you can read about in the book of Jasher. Jones' Dictionary of Old Testament Proper Names derives it from the Egyptian word for water, mo, and the verb to save out of water, usus, hence Moses, Exodus 2:10. Just as God gave Moses the rod that would become a serpent as a sign of God, so too God gave Moses the ability to, as it were, cast a celestial sea monster, being Leviathan, that would in appearance seem to come out of the water onto Egypt, causing the Exodus plagues. Leviathan is a celestial Planet X body with a long tail. In Isaiah 27:1 mentions Leviathan and the dragon or Tanayin as related to the end times, and Job 26:13 uses the exact same Hebrew words as in Isaiah 27 for Leviathan as the fleeing serpent, where it says, "By his spirit he has garnished the heavens, his hand hath formed the fleeing serpent." This means Leviathan is a heavenly serpent and linked to the seas. In other words, it appears to come up from the seas as you look south from the northern hemisphere over the waters, but is actually coming in the sky. At the time of the Exodus, the Egyptians were killing every male child of the Hebrews. The Hebrews in Egypt were said to be as God's firstborn son, so he links up the idea of God's firstborn son being killed before a major rescue event happens from Pharaoh, who is represented as a serpent in Isaiah 51:9. Just like as Christ was the firstborn son of God, also died on the cross. As the Israelites witnessed the plague and the 3 days of darkness caused by Moses' serpent or Leviathan, so too civilizations around the world experienced and saw the same celestial serpent ascend from the seas and do battle in the heavens, being eventually defeated, which how I will explain later. This sign in the heavens is symbolic of the spiritual battle between God and Satan, with the devil being defeated in the end. When you do a detailed chronology of biblical events that coincide with these celestial serpent flybys, you can work out its orbit and predict a return date. This I have done, but I'll put that in another video. Some of the Israelites, upon leaving Egypt, immediately started worshipping the golden calf, claiming that this had saved them out of Egypt in Exodus 32:4. This would have had horns like an ox or a bull to represent this celestial event in the heavens as seen by them in Egypt, as the initial body had a tail that looked just like the horns of a bull or an ox, which I'll attempt to prove from secular writings and pictures. Most ancient cultures worldwide linked the bull to their god and gave sacrifice and worship to it to try and prevent further catastrophes. In a few Asian cultures they used the serpent as their god in the same way. In the following, I attempt to convey 4 things. That 1. Many ancient civilizations mentioned a story that matches the Hebrew dragon Leviathan. Number 2. Leviathan is a Planet X type body with a long tail that separates from itself to look like a dragon or serpent, and hence is really a celestial serpent. Number 3. Leviathan had 7 heads, which matches Revelations chapter 12 as the great red dragon in the heavens yet to return. And number 4, what they saw really tells the story of God's salvation that would later come through Jesus Christ. Many ancient mythologies record this same event in their own way, often putting it into a story mixed with local culture and thinking while making them their gods, worshipping and making sacrifices to them, which I will now discuss. Note that you have to first unwind the local cultural interpretations placed on the event to then compare the basic facts to other events from around the world. The Canaanite god Lotan appears prominently in the ancient city of Ugarit in Canaan in what is known as the Ras Sharma cuneiform tablets excavated since the 1930s. Dr. Charles Pfeiffer in his book Lotan and Leviathan makes mention of some Old Testament verses that closely match some text actually found in the Ras Sharma, which links Lotan to Leviathan. A quote from the cuneiform text of Ugarit: "For you smote Lotan, the slippery serpent, and made an end of the twisting serpent, the tyrant with 7 heads. The heavens will grow hot and will droop." You compare that to a similar verse in the Bible, in Isaiah chapter 27:1, where it says, "In that day the Lord with his hard and great and strong sword will punish Leviathan the fleeing serpent, Leviathan the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that is in the sea." Virtually all agree that the Canaanite Lotan is equivalent to the Hebrew Leviathan. Here in Ugarit, as well as in West Semitic mythology, Lotan ruled the rivers and the seas while Baal was lord of the rains and thunder. In the Ras Sharma text, Lotan was challenged in battle by the sky god Baal, with Baal slaying Lotan after a furious battle, but not before being eaten by Mot, the god of the dead, to return from the dead and then to defeat Lotan. This is a very common element in mythology of the ancient Near East. Lotan, or Leviathan, is described in the ancient accounts as the tyrant with 7 heads, the primeval serpent, or the chaos monster, the twisting serpent, and the ancient dragon. The Hebrew word for the sea is yam, and is the same word used in the Canaanite myths to represent the god of the sea, with the god of death being Mot, who took Baal there after defeating Lotan. Baal, however, overcomes Mot also after coming out of Sheol to take his eternal kingdom as prince and lord as rider of the clouds. It's interesting how many of those things actually sound like the Christian return of Christ. In Psalm 74:14 says, "Thou broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces and gave him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness." So here Leviathan has more than one head recorded in the Bible. An interesting note about the Ugarit story of Baal, Mot, and Lotan, but using different names of the gods, mentions a period of 7 years of blight on the land as a result of war in the heavens, which is what most Christians claim as the length of the final tribulation period. This picture shows the 7-headed dragon Lotan fighting the god Baal. It appears to be attacking a circular disc here, although it may be just a hole. Notice Baal having horns like a bull, and seems to have defeated one of the heads already there. The picture on the right is Baal with something like a lightning spear in his hand, who also has horns like a bull. The Egyptian god Horus is said to be the lord of the sky and often identified with the sun god Ra. He was the son of Isis, and in their own writings mentions that he flew up into the sky in the form of a great winged disc, attacking Ra's enemies, which start in the southern sky, heading north, as I quote from Ancient Egyptian Legends by M.A. Murray. "A disc that glowed like a ball of fire with great wings on either side, like the colours of the sky at sunset, when the blue shades from dark to light, and is shot with gold and flame." And also, "Upon his glorious wings he rose into the air." The Babylonian description of the star Nibiru has many similarities to this also. In Egyptian writings it says that Horus made Ra's enemies to lose their sight and hearing so as to kill each other, and then I quote, "While over them flew the gleaming disc, watching for Set." Also, "The air was filled with the noise of the combat." It mentions Horus was equipped with glittering weapons, which sounds like the lightning. Of Set, it mentions, "The earth and the heavens trembled at the sound of his roaring." And of Horus, The boat of Ra went against them, and above the boat shone the glory of the great winged disk. Ra is the sun god here, moving across the horizon like in a boat. End of quotes. Set is said to resemble a serpent, dragon, crocodile or other shape, but is always red in colour and associated with the river Nile, with storms and thunderclouds. They make mention of Horus making their enemies kill each other, as has an interesting connection to the Babylonian tradition about the lunar eclipses in the month of Nisan causing the exact same thing, along with destruction, which is when the exodus from Egypt occurred, being in the first month. Set is said to be able to throw a jet of fire upon Horus and having a host of demons to support him. Both Set and the god Apep is said to be evil, causing darkness, be poisonous and fire spouting. In one variant story, Horus virtually dies by being stung by the enemy, but through magic comes back to life again to then defeat the evil Set. Interesting, in Egypt, Ba was also known as the god of thunder, and the Greeks equated Set to their god Typhon. In these pictures you can see the red disc above the head of Horus. Notice how the top left also shows the bull's horns underneath the red disc, while at the top right just shows the horns. You have to compare the depiction of the bull's horns at the bottom left to see that this is what they were actually portraying as part of their god Horus. This same theme is repeated in other gods like Isis at the bottom right, using the same shape of the bull's horns. Two of the pictures at the top also show the serpent surrounding the red disc, as to convey the two things together, the red disc and the serpent. The horns are not a symbol of female anatomy as some claim, as Horus also has them being the son of Isis, and the quotes above clearly mention them as wings of a red heavenly disc which resemble bull's horns from their own pictures, as you can see. The Egyptian god Thoth became credited as the inventor of the 365-day calendar rather than the previous 360-day calendar, which occurred around 740 BC, and in helping the god Tefnut to return moisture back to Egypt. Tefnut was associated with a difficult time in Egypt's history, with the Nile drying up and the land being in chaos. It is recorded that she raged through the countryside, emitting flames from her eyes and nostrils, with gloom descending on Egypt. She is associated with a lot of blood and the devouring of animals and human flesh. It is said she left Egypt to go to Nubia, which is directly south of Egypt, where wild lions ravaged the place until she returned back to Egypt, bringing moisture once again to the land with the help of Thoth. No doubt why they associated the head of a lion with their god Tefnut, the red disc and snake being above its head also. With Hathor, it is recorded that for 3 days Hathor killed and drank the blood of men. All of mankind was about to be wiped out as she slaughtered indiscriminately. A red liquid is associated with her spilling over the land like blood. The sun is also associated with trembling as it ascended in the sky, which is most likely talking about earthquakes. Hathor is said to be sent from the sun god Ra secretly, and no doubt means coming from the direction of the sun and appearing suddenly. We can see how all these Egyptian gods had the horns and circular discs above their heads on one way or another. Here we can see all 4 of the main Egyptian gods with discs and horns on their heads. From the left is Thoth, then Isis, then Pharaoh in the middle, then Tefnut, and Horus. Here with Horus, the disc is not shown on his head, but is shown in other pictures earlier. It looks as though the tail of this Planet X body was different each time it came, to give rise to a new god each time, rather than being a return of the old one. All of them, however, had horns like a bull, under a circular disc being red in colour when used. Of interesting note, the Greek historian Herodotus from the 5th century BC records what the priest in Egypt told him, that since Egypt became a nation, The rising of the sun has reversed its direction of rising 4 times, i.e. from east to west and vice versa. The Babylonian god Labu was a gigantic sea dragon supposedly recorded by them as 300 to 400 miles long, while Tishpak was a storm god connected with storms and clouds that shoots a missile at Labu to destroy him. It is said that after the defeat of Labu, its blood flowed for 3 years and 3 months. Some Mesopotamian cylinder seals found show gods in conflict with 7-headed snakes, while another shows 2 gods attacking a 7-headed snake. There are some cylinder seals showing the repeated theme of a heavenly disk with horns underneath it, almost like a lunar eclipse. This is not a lunar eclipse, however, as we don't see lunar eclipses like this, and the disk is not the sun, as the sun cannot eclipse the moon. Only the moon can eclipse the sun. The disk is not the sun, as if it was, you wouldn't be able to look at it directly and see that it had a horn object underneath it. So we see something very strange in the heavens here repeated time and time again in their history and linked to their gods. The 7 balls or small discs are also linked in almost all pictures of this also, which may represent either the 7 heads or 7 helpers of that event. In other instances, they separate the disc from the horns to create what looks to be 2 separate gods from it, like the top left picture does. In many pictures, the hero god figure is standing on a bull, just as the disc is above the horns in the winged disc symbol. Marduk actually means solar calf or bull calf, and is said to be the younger god to replace the storm god Tishpak. Tiamat is serpent-like god of the salt waters and said to produce numerous animal shapes like snakes, vipers, dragons and storm dragons, etc., which were too terrible to look at, while Marduk used storm winds and arrows to defeat Tiamat. Tiamat is said to have many heads and supported with a host of monstrous snake-shaped creatures. It is said that Marduk filled his body with flame and rode on the 4-horse chariot to shoot Tiamat with his bow. He is said to trample on the host of demons that came with Tiamat, binding them and sending them to the world of the underground. In one variant story, Marduk only defeats Tiamat after being resurrected from the dead, as Tiamat had eaten him. Notice how Marduk is running after the fleeing Tiamat here with a 3-pronged lightning in his hands, which is extremely common theme mentioned in many cultures. Above the serpent's head, a figure like a letter U, which could be a representation of the bull horns or a rare type of lunar or solar eclipse from above instead of the usual sideways which we see. The Babylonian god Lamassu is a celestial being from Mesopotamian mythology bearing a human head, bull's body, sometimes with the horns and ears of a bull, and wings, which means it is seen in the sky resembling a bull or bull's horns. An interesting note about Babylonian tradition is that if a lunar eclipse takes place in the first month of Nisan, as they say, in the first watch, there will be destruction and brother will slay brother. At this time, they also say, when the light fails, they should cry aloud that catastrophe, murder, rebellion, and eclipse come not near Erech, the palace, the shrine of Iana. Clearly in their history they experienced such things from special lunar eclipses related to previous catastrophes of destruction at those times. As part of a religious prayer that the Babylonians would recite goes as follows: O divine bull, shining light who does illuminate the darkness, burning bull of Anu. So we see how their bull god is linked to shining and burning. The story of Jonah being swallowed by the big fish and avoiding being eaten by it by being spat out after his repentance perfectly matches the story of the city of Nineveh in Babylon that actually repented and was spared God's judgment by Leviathan, the sea monster which they would have seen coming in the heavens to give Jonah credence for the entire city to all repent at once. This is actually recorded in their history somewhat, and the timing of it lines up quite well with my orbital estimate of Leviathan being at that time around 760 BC. Interestingly, they also have a fish god called Onez, which Jonah in Hebrew sounds the same, so they may have thought him to return also, or could even be the same person. Notice how the picture shows the god Lamassu connected with flying bulls and a flying disc directly over his head. If you put the flying disc together with the bull's horns, you get the same picture like what the Egyptians used on their god like Horus and many others. The Sumerian god Ninurta was the god of thunder, rainstorms as well as war. He defeats the serpent monster and demon Azag, who used stone warriors or coals of fire on the cities. Obviously this is talking about meteorites. It is said that the demon Azag used the sky as a weapon and was poisonous. Ninurta initially suffers damage from the battle but returns to defeat Azag using fire and his weapons to restore order to all the chaos. In Sumerian poetry, there is a mention of a seven-headed serpent named Musagimin, apparently the seven-headed serpent slain by the god Ninurta. The Sumerians also have the same story of the Babylonian Labu sea dragon battle. Actually, Labu is also known as Asaglabu, who sets fire to the land. Notice how the picture of Ninurta chases a fleeing dragon with his three-pronged thunderbolt. Also, the winged disc and winged disc with horns is also shown. This is not a UFO, it is often has a solar appearance, and what UFO uses lightning strikes to battle a celestial dragon. According to some English translations of the Sumerian cuneiform tablets regarding Nibiru by Horowitz and others say that Nibiru is Marduk's star, or as a god itself being red that comes from the south. It is said to be a large star of dim light in the middle of the sky and appears once the evening stars have finished, which would be in the early morning hours just before sunrise. The ancient Akkadians had the same myths as the Sumerian Ninurta and Azag. In Old Akkadian, the seven-tongued serpent Hubalu may also have had 7 heads. In Assyria, the god Ashur assumed the roles of Enlil and Marduk, and was also, as might be expected, especially the god of war. One of his most commonest symbols was the winged disc, enclosing the upper part of the god in the act of discharging an arrow from his bow. This same theme is repeated in their history, as in Egypt and Babylon fighting against the water serpent. The Hurrians in their history also have the cosmic fight between the storm god Teshub and the dragon Hedamu. Notice that the ring in the top 2 pictures is really just a symbol of the flying disc, as shown in the bottom pictures, which looks like a sun-type object with wings symbolizing it flying across the heavens. The Syrian Hittite myth mentions the weather god first being wounded in battle with the dragon Ilulyankas, before getting help to defeat the serpent and his henchmen. The word Ilulyankas actually means serpent. Ancient depictions here show either a spear or a 3-pronged lightning bolt that killed Ilulyankas. Notice the bull's horns on the hero god's head, as well as the serpent having 7 heads. It is said in their writings that the sea monster god Ilikumi grew up quickly until he reached the heavens, coming up from the underworld, and initially defeats Teshub, the storm god, but Teshub later returns to defeat him on his chariot with thunders and rains. Many similarities exist between the Canaanite Baal and Lotan and the Greek Zeus and Typhon here. Here on the left you can see a human-looking figure, Teshub, on a bull to give the god a persona and linked to bull's horns. The somewhat more literal representation is shown above his head as a flying disc object with wings underneath that look like bull's horns, as understood by the ancients. The 3-pronged lightning weapon is shown in his hand also. Hadad or Hadad is the Lord of the sky and God of thunder and lightning. He is closely linked to the Canaanite Baal, who fights the dragon with thunderbolts just like Marduk of the Babylonians. He rides on the back of a bull, with the sky disk above the bull's horns shown in the winged disk. Of note, the Phoenician word drakon is the origin of our word dragon today, which the Greeks also used and handed down, making its way into English. The Phoenician god Cadmos was the son of Ares, or weather god, who defeated the serpent Drakon with a spear or arrow, which is a possible symbol of the thunderbolt. Drakon is said to live in a cave guarding a nearby river in Thebes. According to Ovid, he is said to be as large as the celestial snake that lies between the two celestial bears in the constellations, having eyes like fire and poisonous breath. Ovid also says that Cadmos threw a stone at Drakon so huge it shook the city's ramparts, yet didn't hurt the dragon at all. Drakon is said to have wrapped himself around Cadmos to weaken him before Cadmos was able to eventually defeat the dragon. Note that our English word today we use for a type of snake, the python, comes from the Greek myth of Apollo killing the huge serpent god Python. Also, the word Apollo is closely connected with Apollyon, the king of the bottomless pit mentioned in Revelations, which also means the destroyer. Apollo is said to have killed the dragon Python, which plagued the earth using arrows after a hard battle in the land of Delphi. Note that our English word today we use for typhoon comes from the Greek god Typhon. The Zeus-Typhon story very much resembles the Canaanite battle of Baal, Yam, Lotan, and Mot, in which Typhon challenges Zeus for rule of the cosmos. Typhon is said to have 100 snake heads and breathes fire and every kind of noise. According to the Greek poet Hesiod of around 700 BC, in his book Theogony, he says, Zeus thundered hard and mightily, and the earth around resounded terribly, and the wide heaven above, and the sea and the ocean streams and the nether parts of the earth. Great Olympus reeled beneath the divine feet of the king as he arose, and the earth groaned thereat. And through the two of them heat took hold on the dark blue sea, through the lightning and thunder, and through the fire from the monster, and the scorching winds and blazing thunderbolt. The whole earth seethed, and sky and sea, and the long waves raged along the beaches, round and about at the rush of the deathless gods, and there arose an endless shaking. He also says, a great part of huge earth was scorched by the terrible vapour, and melted as tin melts when heated by men's arts in channelled crucibles, or as iron, which is the hardest of all things, is shortened by glowing fire in mountain glens, and melts in the divine earth through the strength of the god Hephaestus. Even so, then, the earth melted in the glow of the blazing fire. Note, Hephaestus is like a god of volcanoes to the Greeks, as Vulcan was to the Romans. The Greeks also linked the Egyptian god Horus to their god Apollo and later Zeus, and the enemy Typhon to the Egyptian god Set. The background to this story is that Zeus defeated Kronos first, and afterwards Typhon, who's born from Kronos, tries to get revenge for Kronos' death and initially kills Zeus, but Zeus resurrects again to then defeat Typhon. A plague is also mentioned as released on the land. Perseus as a god descends to the underworld as a dead man, but magically returns after cutting off the serpent's head of Medusa. Perseus returns to defeat Ketos, the sea monster. Medusa is known to be too terrible to look at, which would turn people into stone, having many heads for hair. Ketos is the minister of wrath of Poseidon, the god of the sea, which corresponds to the Canaanite Lotan, or Hebrew Leviathan. The many-headed Greek Hydra was a dragon which was killed by Hercules. She was of huge size, and her breath could kill people. Hercules had to fight against other dragons and demons and descend into a dark cave for an extended time before coming out victorious over the Death Lord. In Greek mythology, numerous accounts make mention of a Planet X-like celestial body called Phaeton, or Phaethon, which means shining one. The story says, as recounted by Ovid around the time of Christ, that Phaeton, son of Helios, the sun, ventured to mount his father's chariot of 4 swift horses of Sol, or Helios, i.e. Athon, which means blaze, Eos means dawn, Pyros means fire, and Phlegon means flame, but lost control and came too close to the earth, which, as I quote, seemed ablaze and black smoke hovered in the air. It is said while high in the air that his face grew pale, his knees in sudden fear shook, and his eyes were blind with the light so bright. Afterward Zeus smote Phaeton with a thunderbolt, and the youth is thrown down from the chariot and is falling headlong, for his hair is on fire and his breast smouldering with the heat, where he fell into the Eridanos river. Then Zeus brought back the sun to its accustomed course. The Argonauts were plagued by the nauseating stench from Phaeton's smouldering body in the river. In the beginning, Phaeton meets his father, Sol, and clings to him before riding his fiery chariots. Phaeton comes from the east as the Stella, or stars, took flight. It is said the parched fields crack deep, all moisture dried, and every summit flames, and the dry corn of its own destruction feeds. These are but trifles. Mightily cities burn with all their ramparts, realms and nations turn to ashes, mountains with their forests blaze. Athoth is burning, Oat is on fire, Tmolus and proud Taurus Cilix and the rest and crest of Ide, dry whose springs were once so famed. He, Phaeton, breathed vapours that burn like furnace blasts, and felt the chariot glow white-hot beneath his feet. Cinders and sparks past, bearing shoot and swirl, and scorching smoke surrounds him. It continues, this 7 mouths gaped dusty, 7 veils without a stream, then with a quake, a mighty tremor that convulsed the world. And Mother Tellus, or Earth, says, scarce can my throat find voice to speak. The smoke and heat were choking her. See my singed hair, ash in my eyes, ash on my lips so deep. Why shrinks that mane, his charge, and form the sky so far recoils? And Tellus, or Earth, could speak no more, nor more endure the fiery heat and vapour, and sank back to her deep caverns next to the mains, which means ghosts of the underworld. Phaeton had 3 sisters, or 7 according to Hesiod, who are said, I quote, calling day and night Phaeton, who never more would hear their moans. And 4 times the waxing crescent of the moon had filled her orb in their wonted way. Wailing was now their wont, they made lament for Phaeton. And Sol, meanwhile dishevelled, his bright sheen subdued as in the gloom of an eclipse. Then all the deities surrounded Sol, or Helios, and begged him and beseeched him not to shroud the world in darkness. It says the same disaster dried the Isthmian rivers in Greece, the Hebrus, which is the Maritsa River in Greece, the Strymon or Struma River in Greece and Bulgaria, the Rhenus or the Rhine River in Italy and Germany, the Padus or Po River in Italy, the Tiberus, which is the Tiber River in Rome, as well as creating the Sahara Desert. It mentions wide seas shrink where ocean lay, a wilderness of dry sand spread, new peaks and ranges rise, long covered by the deep. It seems quite clear here we're dealing with a Planet X body, not a comet or such thing as the fiery chariot of Sol departed, but Phaeton the rider was thrown down to the ground in flames, or meteors. And after burning up the earth. It is mentioned it dried up the lands from the deserts of Africa to all Europe, pretty much the known world. It mentions it coming from the direction of the sun from the east as the earth tilted and changed the constellations in the sky. After the burning and lightning came earthquakes, famine, drought, and pestilence with darkened skies for about 4 months. In one translation by Henry Riley, he explains that Phaeton was the fourth in lineal descent from Kekrops, king of Athens, around 1580 BC. This timing lines up very closely to the Exodus out of Egypt, within 60 years to my own biblical chronology. 40 years after the Exodus, however, is recorded in the Bible another Planet X event that made the day stand still for about a whole day in Joshua's day, which more closely matches to this Greek account of Phaeton than the Exodus, as it was white hot, and matches Behemoth in the Old Testament drying up all the rivers and creating deserts, believed to be also the star wormwood burning like a torch in the book of Revelations. An Egyptian priest is said to tell an account regarding Phaeton to Solon, an Athenian statesman of around 600 BC, that Phaeton, I quote, signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which reoccurs after long intervals. Others make mention of Phaeton like Euripides, a playwright of around 450 BC, Suetonius, the Roman historian of about 180 AD, and the early church father Lactantius in around 240 AD mentions in his second book that the conflagration of the world, as is said to have happened in the case of Phaeton. The Indian god Vrita was the gigantic snake over the waters, who was wicked and a leader of a demonic host. His movements is said to shake the earth and the heavens, and his long tail to cause stones to fall everywhere. The other Indian god, Indra, fought Vritra, but was eaten by Vritra before coming back to life to defeat the snake to gain kingship over the world. Indra used thunderbolts to overcome Vritra, just as Zeus did with Typhon to release the sun's light again, as the floods were also released. During the battle, however, the lands became dry with all the rivers dried up. Garuda, as a bird creature, is said to be a powerful and beneficial god, as huge as a mountain with eyes like lightning, illuminating the whole world, as if desired could swallow the oceans and drain thousands of rivers dry. He was said to be far more powerful than the serpent slayer Indra, and known as the devourer, and associated with the sun and fire. Kalia is said to be a many-headed serpent, which made the rivers boil and bubble with poison. Kalia, the black python who vomits up blood, is not killed by Garuda but by Krishna instead. In the folklore of China, tempests, floods, and the like are caused by battles between dragon hosts, or sometimes by a single combat between two dragons. Qi Yu was a monster that came against the Yellow Emperor, who used a winged dragon Ying Lung against Qi Yu. Ying Lung used the waters as a weapon against Qi Yu, used wind and rain as his weapons, causing the land to flood. Ying Lung is said to defeat Qi Yu after the rain stopped. Note, Long in Chinese means dragon, and Lung in Cantonese means the same thing, while Ying may be connected to dark clouds, hence Ying Lung, the dark cloud dragon. In Kun Kun versus Chuan Tzu, Kun Kun was a monster that fled once defeated and broke the northwest column with his horns, displacing the sun, the moon, and stars, causing a flood on the earth. He fought and lost against Chuan Tzu. In Kun versus Chu Yang, Kun was building dams incorrectly and was killed by Chu Yang, the celestial Lord's Minister of Justice. It wasn't until 3 years later that the world was set in order again by Yu. They record that during the reign of Emperor Yu, the sun did not set for a number of days. The forests were set on fire with a high wave reaching the sky, pouring over the land. They also mention the east and west being reversed in the rising of the sun. The Japanese god Susanoo fought an 8-headed evil snake on earth long enough to cover 8 hills and valleys with 2 mountains on his back. Susanoo gets the snake drunk before cutting it up into 8 parts, with each cut causing thunders during a time of darkness. Susanoo is also here connected with the sea, the fire, rain and wind. After Susanoo defeats the snake, it is appointed ruler over the sea, but instead brings much destruction and later dries up the rivers and seas and causes the forests and meadows to wither. She brings darkness again on the land along with evil demons before he is forced to leave for the underworld as the sun returns again. In the mythology of Akatamori and the water snake, the evil water snake had been killing many people near the rivers, which Agatamori kills in a cave at the bottom of the river. This story continues the same theme of darkness and the abode of the serpent in the rivers. Ancient samurai used a very interesting headdress in battle which very much looks like the winged disc of ancient cultures. Most Mesoamerican beliefs included the cycles of suns. Usually our current time was considered to be the 5th sun, the previous 4 having been destroyed by flood, fire, hurricane and the like. In the Aztec mythology, Tezcatlipoca was the first god to be a sun. Being also the god of the night, he was an enemy of Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl knocked Tezcatlipoca from the sky, and in revenge, Tezcatlipoca took the form of a jaguar and destroyed the world. It is said that Tezcatlipoca pulled down the sky to the earth, killing all living things. The natural replacement was Quetzalcoatl, meaning feathered serpent, who became the next sun. But the rivalry continued, and the paw of the jaguar knocked him from the sky, so the reign of the second sun god came to an end. A great wind arose, and there was a great destruction on the earth. The gods next chose Tlaloc, a god of rain, to be the sun. But Quetzalcoatl wasn't happy and made the fire rain down, causing destruction on the earth and the end of the age. Here Tlaloc is shown as a winged disc, grabbing the head of Quetzalcoatl. Next came the Aztec sun goddess Tlaloc's sister, Chalchutlic, was chosen by Quetzalcoatl to next rule the sky. Chalchutlic was the goddess of water, lakes and streams. But once again the fighting of the gods caused the destruction of the world, which was again destroyed by the floods. In the ancient Popol Vuh of the Maya, the Hanafu and Xbalanque, as both young gods, shoot the god Macau with their blowguns but suffer a terrible wound to flee and later come back again when Macau is killed. After this, the young gods cause earthquakes, volcanoes and hurricanes. An interesting note about the origin of the word hurricane is from the Maya storm god, Hurricane, who has one leg and known as Lord of the Whirlwind. It is said he sends the great flood to destroy his inferior creations. There are a number of stories from the North American Indians about the fire or light being stolen, making darkness on the land, where in one story the god Thunder, with his daughter armed with wind, hail and rain, fought the thieves who stole the light to get it back. In the mythology of Thunderbird versus Whale, Whale was a monster, killing other whales and depriving the Zilet tribe of meat and oil. Thunderbird, a benevolent supernatural being, soared over the coastal waters, plunged into the ocean and seized Whale. A struggle ensued. The oceans receded and rose again. Many canoes were flung into trees and many people were killed. Thunderbird eventually succeeded in lifting Whale out of the ocean, carrying it high into the air and then dropping it. Then another great battle occurred on the land. Thunderbird is known to cause the shake the mountains and uplift trees from their roots. Note that mega tsunamis are mentioned here. In one variant story, Thunderbird comes from his dark cave, causing darkness with black clouds. It began to rain a little, not so much at first. Then the rain changed to hail. The hail was larger than a man's fist. It killed and mangled all the people there on the prairie. At another coming of the Thunderbird, there was no sun, there was no land. For 4 days the water rose up and also took 4 days to recede from covering the whole land. This story, although simple, has the key basics the same, with Thunderbird using lightning to defeat Whale. Destructions by localized floods are mentioned in their history. In the Icelandic epoch regarding the fight between Wolf Fenris and the Serpent Midgard, I quote, "Storms come in summer, then comes the day, and dark grows the sun. In a great upheaval the heaven is cloven. In anger smites the warden of earth. Forth from their homes must all men flee. The sun turns black. The earth sinks in the sea. Hot stars down from heaven are whirled. Fierce grows the stream till fire leaps high above the heavens itself." This quote is clearly so significant they preserve the memory for eons, just like many of the ancient cultures around the world. In Siberia, the Vogels record God sent a sea of fire upon the earth. The cause of the fire they call the fire water or fire flood that lasted for 7 years. In overview, the names differ, but the story remains basically the same across different civilizations around the world. Names like the Babylonian Enlil later became Marduk and Ashur, with Marduk being identified with Zeus of the Greeks and Kronos of the Phoenicians. Enlil was god of the air, sky, wind, storm, and war. It was the god Hadad, which the Syrians and Canaanites call Baal, the title in the form of Bel that the Babylonians gave to Enlil and Marduk as the dragon fighter using thunderbolts. In virtually all these ancient myths, the key points are the same, with the storm god fighting a serpent that comes from the sea, with the storm god being killed initially before being raised from the dead and defeating the serpent with thunderbolts and dividing it up into pieces and sending it over the earth, bringing new life. It has an amazing parallel to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ before resurrecting to defeat the dragon, or Satan. Some say this is a shared myth, but I disagree, as they all have different names for the gods, but rather independent traditions that share a common story, as they all saw the same things in the heavens. The Asian traditions, although very similar, make out the dragon as the hero instead of the evil monster, like most other traditions do, so more evidence for a non-shared religion, as they at least would have got the hero and foe right if they had a shared belief. The only time they might have shared one of their gods, which did happen, was when they kept the same or very similar names of the gods, not using different ones from close neighbouring cultures. Even though defeated and killed, most stories mention the serpent coming back to life again, with the fight continuing, which matches the Old Testament passages about the death of Leviathan in Psalm 74:14, yet it also says it would be slain again in Isaiah 27:1 during the end times. Joseph Fontenoy's, in his book Python, a study of Delphic myth and origins, mentions 27 features of similarity between the Babylonian combat myths to Greek Tython or Python Phaeton myths. An interesting note about Hadad is said to have an ally of 7 evil demons which swept over the earth and sky, bringing darkness and destruction. With the Egyptians, the 7 demons are connected with the evil serpent, bringing storm, drought, eclipse, plague, black magic, beasts, and darkness itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh closely matches the story of the Greek Hercules, where Gilgamesh defeats the dragon Humbaba, having teeth of a dragon, the roar like a storm flood, mouth like fire, and deadly breath. The Humbaba also had 7 demons to assist it, of a viper, dragon, snake, fire, flood, and lightning, etc., which is clearly a combination of symbolic and literal events mixed into a human story. After the death of the dragon-like Humbaba, Ishtar, who was refused marriage by Gilgamesh, gets her parents to create a bull or ox of heaven which was able to drink the river dry and strip the land. This seems to me clearly to be another heavenly serpent-like object, but in this case dries up the waters, which when you compare Behemoth of the Old Testament, it is mentioned as doing the same thing as in Job 40:23, that he drinks up a river, even the Jordan, and in verse 19, being the chief of the ways of God. Verse 15 even likens him to an ox, where it says, he eats grass as an ox, and in verse 17, has a long tail like a cedar. The 7 demon helpers, like the ones of Gilgamesh's Humbaba, are always connected with darkness and floods of waters coming together and being like monsters. Closely connected with this is the land of death, which the hero or serpent slayer temporarily goes to during the battle before coming back out to finally defeat the serpent. From the Bible, the land of death is mentioned many times as the land of the shadow of death, as in Isaiah 9:2. Job 24:17 links darkness and terrors to the shadow of death. Psalms 104:17 also links darkness to shadow of death. Job 38:16-17 links the depths of the sea to the doors of the shadow of death, while Job 10:22 links total darkness and disorder to the land of the shadow of death. Job 12:22 mentions God bringing something out of the deep during the shadow of death. Jeremiah 13:16 links the shadow of death to gross darkness starting at noontime. And Job 44:19 links the place of dragons to the shadow of death. In Job 3:5 links clouds, darkness of day, and terror to the shadow of death. And in verse 8 links the sea serpent Leviathan to this. So we see how the Bible agrees with ancient mythology here about darkness, waters, terrors, chaos, and demons as connected with the land of death or shadow of death. When you study the modern day prophecies about the coming of the 3 days of darkness, you basically get an exact match. During the Exodus, they also had 3 days of darkness, which Moses started by pointing towards the heavens, which in Exodus 10:21 says was so thick it could be felt. This agrees with the ancients in how they said the sky could descend, choke and kill people, either from lack of oxygen or with poisonous gases. Regarding ancient historians, in the words of Pliny, who was a 1st century Roman philosopher and writer, he says, a terrible comet was seen by the people of Ethiopia and Egypt, to which Typhon, the king of that period, gave his name. It had a fiery appearance and was twisted like a coil, and it was very grim to behold. It was not really a star so much as what might be called a ball of fire. According to John Lidus, who was a 6th century Byzantine writer, in his book Diostensis, says, they say that the 6th comet is called Typhon after the name of King Typhon, seeing that it was once seen in Egypt and which is said not to be a fiery body but a blood red colour. Its globe is said to be modest and swollen, and it is said to have been for some time in the north. The Ethiopians and Persians are said to have seen this and have endured the necessities of all evils and famine. Plutarch, who was a 1st century Greek historian, in his book De Osid et Osiride, identifies Typhon with certain other negative human afflictions, including those of an astronomical nature, where he says, but Typhon is the part of the soul that is like the Titans, passionate, impulsive, irrational, and unstable. He is the part of the body that is morbid and diseased and causes disturbances such as storms, extremes of temperature, and eclipses of the sun and moon. These are like attacks and outbursts of Typhon. In virtually all cases of what happened during the passage of these celestial serpents, It is recorded many times that it makes people a bit crazy and they often attack and kill each other. Not to mention animals attacking humans also, as we actually read in the book of Revelations. Diseases are mentioned here just as in Exodus was also plagued with diseases, and no doubt extreme cold would occur when the sun is eclipsed by it, as it comes from the direction of the sun, with extreme heat when it is at its closest point to the earth. When you connect Leviathan to all these events, then everything starts to line up and make more sense. It being one of God's creations, the seven-headed red sea serpent Leviathan that mainly has power over the sea ascends to battle in the heavens, an opponent shaped as the Egyptians call a red winged disc, and as the Babylonians say, full of fire, or as the Greeks, a ball of fire, or a blood-red globe. Megastorms of heavy rain and wind occur with dark clouds as the battle in the heavens seems to take place. Heavy darkness ensues from the sun being totally eclipsed, with death and demons on the earth, also with massive flooding as all connected. The serpent slayer finally uses lightning bolts to defeat Leviathan and divide his body throughout the earth. After Leviathan is defeated and the flooding ceases, next comes a time of drought, blight and death occurs, with blood-coloured waters remaining according to the Babylonians for 3 years. In reality, it is a single planet of fire with a long tail in which the tail separates itself into a separate object, resembling a many-headed serpent that looks to be fighting the planet of fire by being struck by lightning, as the seas roar along with darkness and flooding, with meteors, heat and fire coming from its tail to the earth. This little event in the heavens is a sign of God's judgment over Satan, causing major upheaval on the earth and resetting things, with the earth later reborn from its destructions, as well as judgment on the wicked as the new light of the sun gets separated from a long period of darkness and chaos. New life is brought about after this from all the electrical discharges causing increased nitrogen in the soil and new growth. The general order of things seems to be initial darkness, storms and rain, massive flooding, then depending on which celestial monster comes, in some cases drought, blight and death. The sun being darkened during daylight is mentioned in many cases caused by the serpent. The ancient Egyptians mentioned 4 lots of previous catastrophes, with the east and west reversing. The North American Chippewa tribe mentioned the Great Spirit tried 4 times previously to create the world, while the South American Incas and Maya also have a record of 4 previous catastrophes, and in some cases they say 5. In my orbital analysis of previous flybys, I have between 4 to 5 times when I would expect serious world changes would have occurred in the past since Noah's flood, which is actually a good match. This, however, is for another video.